57% of Americans hit the snooze button every single morning. And right now, at this very moment, you are either one of them, or you used to be. Either way, what happens in the next 9 minutes of your life is not about sleep. It is about who you are. Here is the truth that no one tells you. The very first war of your day begins before you even open your eyes. When that alarm sounds, two versions of you wake up at the exact same time. The first version remembers your goals. It remembers the promises you made to yourself last night. It remembers the person you said you wanted to become. The second version whispers something different. It says, just 9 more minutes. You deserve it. You will start tomorrow. This 9-minute negotiation is not a debate about rest. It is a referendum on your identity. And every single time you press that button, you are casting a vote. You are telling your subconscious mind exactly what kind of person you are. You are saying that comfort matters more than commitment. You are proving, with action, that the promises you make to yourself are suggestions, not commands. Let that sink in for a moment. The average person will hit the snooze button over 2,000 times in a decade. 2,000 mornings of telling themselves they are not strong enough to keep the simplest promise imaginable. 2,000 votes against their own potential. And then they wonder why they struggle with discipline in every other area of their lives. Here is what the research actually shows. A study published in the Journal of Sleep Research examined over 1,700 participants and found something fascinating. People who snooze regularly reported higher levels of morning drowsiness throughout the entire day, not just in the first hour, the entire day. They also showed shorter overall sleep duration, and here is the critical part. They described themselves as less disciplined in other areas of life. Do you see the pattern? The snooze button is not a harmless habit. It is a training program. Every time you press it, you are training your brain to believe that your word means nothing. You are teaching yourself that when things get uncomfortable, you quit. You are programming the neural pathways of failure before your feet even touch the floor. Now let me show you what separates the average from the elite. Average performers treat the alarm as a suggestion. They hear it, and immediately their mind begins negotiating. I went to bed late. I have a hard day ahead. My body needs this. Just a few more minutes. They believe this internal dialogue is rational. They think they are making a logical decision about rest. Elite performers understand something completely different. They know that the moment the alarm sounds, logic is not running the show. The part of your brain responsible for rational decision-making, your prefrontal cortex, is still waking up. It is operating at reduced capacity. Meanwhile, the part of your brain that craves comfort, your limbic system, is fully alert and screaming for you to stay in that warm bed. This is not a fair fight, and elite performers do not try to win it with willpower in that moment. They have already won it the night before. They have made the decision in advance. When the alarm sounds, there is no debate. There is only execution. Think about what this means for your life. Every morning, you have approximately 5 seconds between the alarm and the snooze button. 5 seconds where the outcome of your entire day hangs in the balance. 5 seconds that determine whether you start as a winner or a loser. A Harvard Business School study on executive performance found that individuals who maintained consistent wake times, without snoozing, demonstrated measurably better decision-making abilities throughout their workday. They reported higher levels of self-efficacy. They were more likely to complete challenging tasks. They earned more money. And it all started with that first 5-second window. Here is another truth. You already know this. Deep down, you have always known it. Every time you hit snooze and then rush through your morning, you felt it. That low-grade anxiety. That sense of being behind before you even started. That frustration with yourself that you tried to ignore but could never quite shake. That feeling has a name. It is called cognitive dissonance. It is the mental discomfort you experience when your actions do not match your beliefs about yourself. You believe you are a disciplined person. You believe you are capable of more. But your very first action of the day contradicts those beliefs. And your brain cannot reconcile the gap. So it does something insidious. It lowers your standards. It adjusts your self-image downward to match your behavior. Over time, you stop believing you are capable of discipline at all. You start saying things like, I am just not a morning person. You have given yourself an identity that protects you from the discomfort of trying and failing. But that identity is a prison. Let me give you the second contrast. Average people say, "I am not a morning person," and they believe it is a fixed trait. They think some people are born with discipline and others are not. They use this belief as permission to stay exactly where they are. Elite performers know the truth. There is no such thing as a morning person. There are only people who have made a decision and people who have not. Discipline is not a personality trait. It is a skill. And like every skill, it is built through repetition. Every morning you rise without snoozing, you are doing a repetition. You are building the muscle. You are becoming someone new. The question is not whether you can do this. You have already proven you can. Think about a time when you absolutely had to wake up early. A flight to catch, an important meeting, a child who needed you. In those moments, you did not negotiate. You did not snooze. You simply got up. That person still lives inside you. That capability has not gone anywhere. The only thing standing between you and that person is a decision. Not motivation, not willpower, not being a morning person. Just a decision made in advance, honored without exception. This book is going to show you exactly how to make that decision stick. You are going to understand the neurological war happening inside your skull. You are going to learn the specific techniques that elite performers use to win the first battle of every day. And you are going to transform your relationship with yourself, starting with the simplest promise you can keep. But here is what you need to understand right now. Knowing is not enough. You have probably heard advice about waking up early before. You have probably tried it and failed. That is because information without implementation is useless. And implementation without understanding the science behind it is fragile. In the next chapter, you are going to discover exactly what happens inside your brain in those critical first moments of waking. You will learn why the snooze button feels so irresistible, and you will understand, at the neurological level, how to rewire that response forever. Win the morning, win the life. And your morning starts now. Chapter 2, The Neurological Battle. Right now, as you listen to these words, there is a war being fought inside your skull. Two ancient systems are competing for control of your behavior, and one of them is trying to destroy your potential. The terrifying part is that you have been letting the wrong side win. Let me introduce you to the combatants. In one corner, you have your prefrontal cortex. This is the most recently evolved part of your brain. It sits right behind your forehead, and it is responsible for everything that makes you human. Planning, reasoning, long-term thinking, self-control. When you set that alarm last night, your prefrontal cortex was in charge. It made a rational decision about when you needed to wake up. It considered your goals. It calculated the time you would need. It made a promise on your behalf. In the other corner, you have your limbic system. This is ancient. It evolved millions of years before your prefrontal cortex even existed. And it has one primary function: to keep you alive by seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. It does not care about your goals. It does not understand the concept of tomorrow. It only knows right now, and right now, that warm bed feels better than the cold floor. Here is what the neuroscience actually reveals. Research from the University of California at Berkeley used functional MRI imaging to study brain activity upon awakening. What they discovered should change how you think about every morning for the rest of your life. In the moments immediately after you wake up, your prefrontal cortex is operating at significantly reduced capacity. Some studies suggest it takes up to 30 minutes for this region to reach full functionality. But your limbic system? It is wide awake from the very first second. Do you understand what this means? When that alarm sounds, you are not having a fair debate between your rational self and your comfort-seeking self. Your rational self is still half asleep. Your comfort-seeking self is fully alert and running the show. This is why the snooze button feels so irresistible. This is why your best intentions from the night before evaporate in an instant. The part of you that made the decision is not the part of you answering the alarm. You have been fighting a battle with one arm tied behind your back, and nobody told you. Now let me show you something even more important. A groundbreaking study from Stanford University's neuroscience department examined what happens in the brain when people override their limbic impulses. They found that each time you successfully resist an immediate comfort in favor of a long-term goal, You strengthen the neural pathways connecting your prefrontal cortex to your decision-making centers. In simple terms, every time you win the morning battle, you are literally building a stronger brain. But the reverse is also true. Every time you surrender to the snooze button, you reinforce the limbic pathways. You make it easier to quit tomorrow. You are not just losing one morning. You are training yourself to lose every morning that follows. This is the compound effect of discipline, and it works in both directions. Here is how the average person experiences this battle. The alarm sounds. The limbic system immediately floods the brain with resistance. It generates thoughts like, "You are so tired. Your body needs this. Just a few more minutes will not matter." The prefrontal cortex, still groggy, attempts to mount a defense. But because it is operating at reduced capacity, it loses. The person hits snooze, feels momentary relief, and the limbic system learns that resistance works. The next morning, the limbic system's resistance is even stronger. It has been reinforced. The neural pathway is deeper. The prefrontal cortex, still at the same disadvantage, loses again. This cycle repeats until snoozing becomes automatic. The person no longer even perceives a choice. They have programmed their brain for defeat. Elite performers experience the same neurological handicap. Their prefrontal cortex is equally groggy at the moment of waking. Their limbic system screams just as loudly for comfort. The biological challenge is identical. The difference is in strategy. Elite performers understand that they cannot win a willpower battle in that moment, so they do not try. Instead, they use what neuroscientists call pre-commitment. They make the decision the night before, when their prefrontal cortex is fully operational, and then they design their environment to make the morning decision automatic. They remove the negotiation entirely. Think about this for a moment. When Navy SEALs go through basic underwater demolition training, they wake up at 5 in the morning for months. Do you think they negotiate with their alarms? Do you think they lie there debating whether they feel like getting up? Of course not. The decision was made when they signed up. The alarm is simply a signal to execute. This is the mindset shift that changes everything. You are not trying to find motivation at 5 in the morning. You are not trying to convince yourself to get up. You made that decision last night. The alarm is not a question. It is a command. Here is a practical insight from the research. Dr. Sonia Bishop at Berkeley's Cognition and Action Lab discovered that the brain's resistance to waking decreases dramatically within the first 90 seconds of physical movement. Once you are vertical and moving, your prefrontal cortex comes online much faster. Blood flow increases. Cognitive function improves. The limbic system's grip weakens. This means your entire battle lasts approximately 90 seconds. That is it. 90 seconds of discomfort, and then your rational brain takes over. 90 seconds between staying a prisoner of your impulses and becoming the master of your mornings. The question is whether you are willing to endure 90 seconds of discomfort to win the rest of your day. Let me give you another piece of the neurological puzzle. Your brain produces a chemical called adenosine throughout the day. Adenosine is a byproduct of mental activity, and it accumulates the longer you stay awake. When adenosine levels are high, you feel drowsy. Sleep clears the adenosine from your system, which is why you normally feel refreshed after rest. But here is what happens when you hit snooze. You fall back into a light sleep state, but this fragment of sleep is not long enough to clear significant adenosine. Instead, your brain begins a new sleep cycle that it cannot complete. When the alarm sounds again, you are actually groggier than you were the first time. Your cognitive function is more impaired, not less. This is called sleep inertia, and it is the hidden enemy that makes the snooze button so devastating. You press snooze thinking you are giving yourself more rest. In reality, you are poisoning your brain's ability to function for the next several hours. But that is a topic so important that it deserves its own chapter. For now, understand this. The neurological battle is real. Your prefrontal cortex is handicapped at the moment of waking. Your limbic system is fully armed and fighting for comfort. You cannot win this fight with willpower alone, but you can win it with strategy. You can win it with pre-commitment. You can win it by understanding that the battle is only 90 seconds long, and 90 seconds of discomfort is a small price to pay for a lifetime of self-trust. The elite do not have more willpower than you. They have better systems. They understand the neuroscience, and they design their mornings to work with their biology instead of against it. In the next chapter, you're going to learn exactly how sleep inertia works and why hitting snooze even once can sabotage your cognitive performance for the entire day. You will understand the science behind the brain fog, and you will discover the specific techniques to clear it instantly. The war inside your brain has been raging for years. It is time you learned how to win it. Win the morning, win the life. Chapter 3: Sleep Inertia, the Hidden Enemy. There is a scientific term for the grogginess you feel after hitting snooze, and once you understand it, you will never press that button again. It is called sleep inertia, and it is silently destroying your mornings, your productivity, and your potential. Sleep inertia is defined as a transitional state characterized by reduced arousal and impaired cognitive performance immediately upon awakening. In plain language, it means your brain does not go from asleep to fully awake like flipping a light switch. There is a transition period where you are technically conscious but operating at significantly diminished capacity. Your reaction time is slower. Your decision-making is impaired. Your working memory is compromised. Here is what the research reveals. A study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that in the first 3 minutes after waking, cognitive impairment from sleep inertia can be more severe than being legally drunk. Let me repeat that. For the first few minutes of your morning, your brain is functioning worse than if you had been drinking alcohol. Now imagine what happens when you hit snooze. You are not giving yourself extra rest. You are restarting the sleep inertia cycle. Every time you fall back asleep and wake up again, you trigger a fresh wave of cognitive impairment. Press snooze 3 times, and you have subjected your brain to 3 separate episodes of diminished function. You walk into your day with a mental handicap that can persist for hours. This is not opinion. This is neuroscience. Researchers at Hiroshima University conducted a 2-part study examining the effects of snooze alarms on waking. They found that 70% of participants regularly used the snooze function, primarily because they believed it helped them wake up more gently. But the objective data told a different story. Snoozing did not improve alertness. It did not enhance cognitive performance. In many cases, it made the transition to wakefulness more difficult, not less. The cruel irony is that the snooze button promises exactly what it cannot deliver. You press it seeking rest, but you receive impairment. You press it seeking comfort, but you create chaos. Let me explain why this happens at the biological level. Your sleep operates in cycles, each lasting approximately 90 minutes. Within each cycle, you progress through different stages. Light sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep. Each stage serves a specific restorative function. Your brain has evolved to complete these cycles fully before waking. When you wake up naturally at the end of a cycle, you feel refreshed because the restorative work is complete. But when an alarm interrupts a cycle midway, your brain is caught in an unfinished process. Sleep inertia is essentially your brain's confusion about what just happened. It was in the middle of important work, and suddenly it has been forced to stop. Now here is the critical insight. When you hit snooze and fall back asleep for 9 minutes, your brain attempts to restart a sleep cycle. But 9 minutes is not enough time to complete anything meaningful. It is not even enough time to complete the first stage of light sleep properly. So when the alarm sounds again, you are waking up from an incomplete fragment of an incomplete cycle. Your brain is now doubly confused. The sleep inertia is worse than it would have been if you had simply gotten up the first time. A study from the University of Stockholm, published in the Journal of Sleep Research, examined over 1,700 participants and measured the effects of habitual snoozing. They used polysomnography, which is the gold standard for sleep measurement, to track brain waves, blood oxygen levels, and heart rate. The findings were definitive. Habitual snoozers experienced longer periods of sleep inertia and reported greater difficulty achieving full alertness throughout the morning hours. Here is where the elite separate themselves from the average. Average people feel the grogginess of sleep inertia and interpret it as evidence that they need more sleep. They think, "I feel terrible, so my body must be telling me to rest more." They hit snooze believing they are listening to their body's wisdom. In reality, they are misinterpreting a neurological transition state as a signal for more sleep. Elite performers understand that sleep inertia is not a message to sleep more. It is a temporary state that dissipates with wakefulness. They know that the fastest way to clear sleep inertia is to get up and start moving. They recognize the grogginess as the final obstacle between them and full cognitive function, not as evidence of insufficient rest. This distinction changes everything. One interpretation keeps you trapped in bed, cycling through waves of impairment. The other launches you into your day with the understanding that discomfort is temporary and clarity is coming. Here is another piece of science you need to understand. Your prefrontal cortex, which we discussed in the previous chapter, is particularly vulnerable to sleep inertia. Research from the Walter Reed Army Institute found that the prefrontal regions of the brain take significantly longer to recover from sleep than other areas. This means that executive functions like planning, judgment, and impulse control are the last to come online. Think about the implications. In the moments after your alarm sounds, the part of your brain responsible for making good decisions is the most impaired. And yet, that is exactly when you are deciding whether to get up or hit snooze. You are making one of the most important decisions of your day with the part of your brain that is least capable of making it. This is why knowledge alone cannot save you. You can understand everything I am telling you right now, but in that moment of waking, your prefrontal cortex will be compromised. You cannot rely on rational decision-making when your rational brain is still offline. You need a system that bypasses the decision entirely. Here is the good news. Sleep inertia, despite its intensity, is remarkably short-lived when you cooperate with wakefulness instead of fighting it. Research shows that light exposure, physical movement, and hydration can dramatically accelerate the dissipation of sleep inertia. Within 15 to 30 minutes of being upright and active, most people achieve full cognitive function. But those same studies show that lying in bed, even while technically awake, prolongs sleep inertia significantly. Your brain interprets the horizontal position and darkness as signals to remain in sleep mode. Every minute you lie there deliberating is a minute your brain stays foggy. The math becomes simple. You can endure 90 seconds of acute discomfort getting up immediately and achieve mental clarity within 15 minutes. Or you can endure 30 minutes of snooze-induced fog and start your day impaired. The first option costs you 90 seconds. The second option costs you your entire morning. Let me give you one more contrast. Average performers see the morning as something to survive. They drag themselves through the fog, relying on caffeine to artificially mask the impairment they have created. They arrive at work already depleted, having spent their best mental energy fighting through self-inflicted grogginess. Elite performers see the morning as a competitive advantage. They wake, they move, they clear the fog fast. By the time average performers are stumbling toward their first coffee, elite performers have already completed focused work. They have leveraged the natural clarity that comes from proper waking into hours of productive output. The difference is not talent. It is not genetics. It is not being a morning person. The difference is understanding sleep inertia and refusing to make it worse. But understanding the problem is only half the equation. You need a specific tool to bridge the gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it. You need something that works in that critical window when your prefrontal cortex is still compromised and your limbic system is begging for comfort. In the next chapter, you will learn the exact protocol used by millions of people to launch themselves out of bed before their brain has time to negotiate. It takes 5 seconds, it requires 0 willpower, and it will change your mornings forever. Win the morning, win the life. Chapter 4. The 5-second launch protocol. There is a window of opportunity that exists between your alarm sounding and your brain talking you out of getting up. That window is exactly 5 seconds long. Miss it, and you lose the morning. Catch it, and you become unstoppable. This is not motivation. This is not positive thinking. This is neuroscience, and it works even when you do not feel like it. Here is what happens in those critical seconds after the alarm. Your brain detects that you are awake and immediately begins generating thoughts. This is automatic. You cannot stop it. But here is the crucial insight. It takes your brain approximately 5 seconds to produce the first compelling excuse to stay in bed, 5 seconds to generate the rationalization, 5 seconds to construct the negotiation. If you move before those 5 seconds expire, you bypass the excuse entirely. You are out of bed before your brain has time to argue. This is the 5-second launch protocol, and it has transformed the lives of millions of people worldwide. The technique was developed by Mel Robbins, a former lawyer who found herself paralyzed by anxiety and unable to get out of bed. She was losing her marriage, her finances were collapsing, and every morning felt like drowning. One night, she saw a rocket launch on television and had a strange thought. What if she launched herself out of bed like a rocket? What if she counted down from 5 and simply moved, without thinking, without negotiating? The next morning, she tried it. The alarm sounded. She counted out loud. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and she moved. Not because she felt like it, not because she was motivated, but because she had given her body a command and her body obeyed. That single technique pulled her out of depression, saved her marriage, and eventually led to a best-selling book, a viral TED Talk, and a career helping others do exactly what she did. But why does counting backwards work? The science is fascinating. Research from the University of Pennsylvania's psychology department has shown that counting backwards requires focused concentration. Unlike counting forwards, which is automatic and mindless, counting backwards engages your prefrontal cortex. It pulls cognitive resources away from other processes. In that moment of counting, your brain cannot simultaneously generate elaborate excuses. It is too busy with the countdown. This is called a starting ritual, and elite performers across every domain use them. Baseball players have their batting stance routines. Surgeons have their pre-operation protocols. Public speakers have their backstage rituals. The purpose is always the same. The ritual interrupts hesitation and triggers action. The 5-second launch protocol is your starting ritual for the most important moment of every day. Here is how you implement it with precision. The night before, you make the decision. You set your alarm for the exact time you intend to wake. Not the time you hope to wake. Not the time that gives you snooze margin. The exact time. Then you make a promise to yourself. When that alarm sounds, you will count backwards from 5 and move your body before you reach 1. Notice what is absent from this protocol. There is no motivation required. There is no willpower required. There is no need to feel ready, feel rested, or feel like getting up. The protocol works precisely because it bypasses feelings entirely. This is critical. Your feelings are not your friend at 5 in the morning. Your feelings are being generated by a limbic system that wants comfort and a prefrontal cortex that is still half asleep. Waiting until you feel like getting up is waiting for a signal that will never come. Action must precede feeling, not the other way around. Here is the difference between average and elite execution. Average people hear the alarm and wait to feel motivated. They lie there, hoping that energy will somehow arrive. They check their phone, scroll through notifications, and tell themselves they are easing into the day. In reality, they are giving their brain time to construct increasingly sophisticated arguments for staying in bed. By the time they finally move, they have lost 30 minutes and started the day in negotiation mode. Elite performers hear the alarm and immediately begin the countdown. They do not assess how they feel. They do not check if they are ready. They count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And they move. Their feet hit the floor before their brain has time to object. They have won the first battle of the day before most people have even started fighting. Let me give you additional research that validates this approach. A study from the Journal of Experimental Psychology examined what researchers call the implementation intention effect. They found that people who linked a specific cue to a specific action were significantly more likely to follow through than people who simply intended to act. The alarm is your cue. The countdown is your bridge. The movement is your action. When you connect these three elements, you create a behavioral chain that becomes automatic over time. The more you practice the 5-second launch protocol, the less effort it requires. Your brain begins to recognize the pattern. Alarm equals countdown equals movement. Within weeks, the countdown itself triggers physical movement almost automatically. you have rewired the habit loop. Here is something else the research shows. A team at Massachusetts Institute of Technology studied habit formation in the basal ganglia, the part of the brain responsible for automatic behaviors. They discovered that habits are not erased when you change behavior. The old neural pathways remain, but you can build new pathways that are stronger. By consistently executing the countdown protocol, you are not deleting your snooze habit. You are building a competing habit that eventually becomes dominant. This explains why the first week is the hardest. Your old snooze pathways are still strong. Your new countdown pathways are still weak. You are in direct competition between two neural networks. But every successful execution strengthens the new pathway and weakens the old one through a process called synaptic pruning. By week 3, the balance has shifted. By month 2, the countdown becomes your default response. Now let me address the objection you might be forming. You might be thinking, this sounds too simple. Counting backwards cannot possibly solve my morning problems. Here is the paradox. The simplicity is the power. Complex systems fail under stress. When your prefrontal cortex is impaired and your limbic system is screaming for comfort, you do not have the cognitive resources for elaborate techniques. You need something so simple that a half-awake brain can execute it. 5 numbers. That is all. The protocol does not require you to be motivated. It does not require you to be disciplined. It does not require you to be a morning person. It only requires you to count backwards and move. Everything else follows. Here is the second contrast between average and elite. Average people make the morning complicated. They create elaborate routines that require motivation to initiate. They depend on feeling good to execute. When they feel bad, the whole system collapses. Elite performers make the morning simple. They reduce the critical moment to a single, repeatable action. They remove dependency on feelings. They create a system that works regardless of mood, energy, or circumstance. The countdown is their forcing function, and it never fails because it never requires anything except the willingness to count. But here is the truth I need to share with you. Even the 5-second protocol can be undermined. If your phone is within arm's reach, you can count down, turn off the alarm, and still fall back asleep. If your environment is designed for comfort, your limbic system has ammunition to fight back. The countdown gets you out of bed, but your environment determines whether you stay out. In the next chapter, you will learn the strategic modifications to your physical space that make falling back asleep nearly impossible. You will discover why the placement of a single object can be more powerful than any amount of willpower. And you will understand how elite performers design their bedrooms as launch pads, not traps. Win the morning, win the life. Chapter 5: Environmental Design. The most powerful technique for waking up early has nothing to do with willpower, motivation, or discipline. It is the strategic placement of a single object. And once you understand why this works, you will never design your bedroom the same way again. Here is the truth that behavioral scientists have known for decades. Human beings are not rational decision makers. We are environmental responders. The choices we make are heavily influenced by the physical context in which we make them. Change the environment, and you change the behavior. This principle applies to everything from eating habits to financial decisions. And it applies with devastating effectiveness to your morning alarm. A study from Duke University's Center for Advanced Hindsight found that approximately 45% of daily human behavior is habitual and driven by environmental cues rather than conscious decision-making. You do not decide to brush your teeth in the morning. You see the toothbrush, and the habit executes automatically. You do not decide to check your phone when you wake up. The phone is there, glowing, and your hand reaches for it without conscious thought. The snooze button operates on the same principle. It is within arm's reach. Pressing it requires zero effort. Your half-asleep brain detects an easy escape from discomfort, and the habit executes before you are even fully conscious. The solution is elegant and brutal in its simplicity. Move your phone across the room. This single change accomplishes multiple objectives simultaneously. First, it forces physical movement to turn off the alarm. You cannot silence it from your pillow. You must stand up, walk across the room, and engage your body. By the time you reach the phone, You have already broken the horizontal position that keeps sleep inertia locked in place. Second, it removes the immediate reward of snoozing. When the alarm is within reach, pressing snooze delivers instant relief with zero cost. When the alarm is across the room, there is no instant relief available. You must pay the price of getting up before you can do anything at all. Third, it creates a decision point outside the bed. Once you are standing in the middle of your room, the decision calculus changes completely. The bed is now several steps away. Getting back in requires active effort. Your brain, now slightly more awake from the movement, can more easily choose to stay up. Research from Cornell University's Behavioral Economics Laboratory demonstrated this principle with food choices. When healthy snacks were placed at eye level and unhealthy snacks required effort to reach, consumption patterns shifted dramatically without any change in willpower or intention. The effort barrier alone was sufficient to change behavior. Your bedroom works the same way. The snooze button is an unhealthy snack for your discipline. Put it where it requires effort to reach. Here is the difference between how average and elite performers structure their environments. Average performers optimize their bedrooms for comfort. The phone charges on the nightstand, within arm's reach. The room stays dark with blackout curtains that make morning indistinguishable from midnight. The temperature is perfect for sleeping. Everything in the environment whispers, "Stay here. Rest more. The world can wait." Elite performers optimize their bedrooms for waking. The phone charges across the room, ideally near the door or in the bathroom. A sunrise alarm clock begins simulating dawn 30 minutes before wake time. The thermostat is programmed to drop temperature in the early morning, making the bed slightly less comfortable. Everything in the environment says, "It is time. Get moving. Your day is waiting." This is not about making your life harder. It is about strategic friction. You add friction to behaviors you want to avoid and remove friction from behaviors you want to execute. The goal is to make getting up the path of least resistance. Let me give you the specific environmental modifications that research supports. Light exposure is critical. Your circadian rhythm, the internal clock that regulates sleep and wakefulness, is heavily influenced by light. When light enters your eyes, it signals your brain to suppress melatonin production and increase cortisol, the hormone that promotes alertness. A study from Harvard Medical School found that exposure to blue-enriched light upon waking accelerated the dissipation of sleep inertia by nearly 40%. Practical application: program a smart light to begin brightening your room 15 to 30 minutes before your alarm. If smart lighting is not available, leave your curtains partially open to allow natural dawn light. The gradual increase in brightness prepares your brain for waking before the alarm even sounds. Temperature also plays a significant role. Research from the National Sleep Foundation indicates that the ideal sleeping temperature is between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit. But your body naturally cools during deep sleep and begins warming as morning approaches. You can leverage this by programming your thermostat to drop by a few degrees in the hour before waking. The slight chill makes staying under the covers less appealing and getting up to put on a robe more attractive. Here is another environmental principle. Prepare the pathway. The first few minutes after waking are when your limbic system fights hardest to get you back in bed. If you have to stumble around in the dark looking for clothes, you give your brain time to generate excuses. If you have to make decisions about what to wear or where to go, you deplete the limited willpower your sleepy prefrontal cortex can muster. Elite performers eliminate these obstacles the night before. They lay out their clothes. They set the coffee maker to brew automatically. They create a clear physical pathway from bed to bathroom to kitchen. Each step is predetermined. Each transition is frictionless. The morning becomes a series of simple physical actions rather than a series of decisions. Let me give you the second contrast between average and elite environmental design. Average performers rely on internal motivation to overcome external obstacles. They keep their phones nearby because it is convenient. They sleep in complete darkness because it feels better. They make decisions about their morning in the morning when their decision-making capacity is at its lowest. Then they blame themselves for lacking discipline when the predictable failure occurs. Elite performers engineer external systems to compensate for internal limitations. They acknowledge that their 5 in the morning self is not their best self. They design the environment to guide that compromised self toward the right behavior automatically. They front-load decisions to the night before, when their prefrontal cortex is fully functional. They treat willpower as a backup system, not a primary strategy. Here is a principle from the field of choice architecture. The person who designs the environment controls the behavior. Right now, your environment may have been designed by accident, by convenience, or by a past version of yourself who did not understand these principles. That environment is controlling you. It is time to take control back. Tonight, before you sleep, I want you to audit your bedroom. Where is your phone? How far must you travel to silence the alarm? What does the lighting situation look like at wake time? What obstacles stand between your bed and starting your day? Each obstacle you identify is an opportunity. Each friction point you remove is a victory secured in advance. Each environmental modification is a vote for your future self, cast while your present self still has the capacity to vote wisely. But environment alone does not complete the system. Getting out of bed is the first victory. What you do in the minutes immediately after determines whether that victory leads to momentum or collapses back into defeat. In the next chapter, you will learn the small wins cascade, a sequence of 3 simple actions that transform your fragile morning victory into unstoppable forward motion. These wins are so small that failure is almost impossible, yet their psychological impact compounds throughout your entire day. Win the morning, win the life. Chapter 6: The Small Wins Cascade. The most successful people in the world do not start their mornings with grand ambitions. They start with a made bed, a glass of water, and 60 seconds of movement. These actions seem almost embarrassingly small, and that is precisely why they work. Here is what neuroscience tells us about the first 30 minutes of your day. Your brain is constantly scanning for evidence to support a narrative. It wants to know, what kind of day is this going to be? Am I winning or losing? Am I in control or am I behind? The answers to these questions are not determined by logic. They are determined by pattern recognition. Your brain looks at the early data points and extrapolates. When you hit snooze, rush through your morning, and leave the house in chaos, your brain registers a pattern of defeat. It says, today is a day where I am behind. Today is a day where I am not in control. That narrative colors every subsequent decision. You are more likely to procrastinate, more likely to make poor choices, more likely to give up when things get difficult. But when you stack 3 small victories in the first 15 minutes of waking, your brain registers a completely different pattern. It says, today is a day where I win. Today is a day where I execute. That narrative creates momentum that carries you through challenges that would have defeated the other version of you. This is called the progress principle, and it was documented extensively by researchers at Harvard Business School. Dr. Teresa Amabile spent over 15 years studying what motivates high performance in the workplace. Her conclusion was surprising. The single most powerful motivator was not money, recognition, or even meaningful work. It was the sense of making progress. Small wins, accumulated consistently, created more motivation and engagement than any other factor. Your morning is the laboratory where you manufacture progress before the world has a chance to interfere. Let me give you the 3 small wins that form the cascade. The first win is making your bed. This takes approximately 90 seconds. It requires no skill, no equipment, and no favorable conditions. You can make your bed when you are tired. You can make your bed when you are stressed. You can make your bed when everything else in your life is falling apart. Admiral William McRaven, a Navy SEAL commander who oversaw the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, gave a commencement speech at the University of Texas that has been viewed over 50 million times. His core message was simple. If you want to change the world, start by making your bed. Here is why this matters. Making your bed is a completion. It is a task that has a clear beginning, a clear end, and a visible result. When you look back at your made bed, your brain registers evidence of discipline. It says, I am the kind of person who finishes things. I am the kind of person who creates order. that identity begins to influence everything else you do. Research from the National Sleep Foundation found that people who make their beds in the morning are 20% more likely to report getting a good night's sleep. They are also more likely to describe themselves as productive and less likely to report feeling overwhelmed. The act of making the bed does not logically cause these outcomes, but the identity shift it creates does. The second win is hydration. Your body loses approximately 1 liter of water through breathing and perspiration during 8 hours of sleep. You wake up in a state of mild dehydration. This dehydration impairs cognitive function, reduces energy levels, and intensifies the grogginess of sleep inertia. A study from the University of East London found that drinking 500 milliliters of water upon waking improved cognitive performance by 14% compared to those who did not hydrate. 14%. That is not a marginal improvement. That is the difference between operating at full capacity and operating with a handicap. The action is simple. Before coffee, before food, before checking your phone, drink a full glass of water. Keep a glass or bottle on your nightstand or next to the bathroom sink. Make it the second thing you do after your feet hit the floor. Here is the first contrast between average and elite morning execution. Average performers stumble to the coffee maker, seeking caffeine to artificially compensate for their dehydration and sleep inertia. They layer a stimulant on top of a deficit and wonder why they crash by mid-morning. They treat the symptom instead of addressing the cause. Elite performers address the root cause first. They hydrate before they caffeinate. They give their body what it actually needs before they give it what it craves. By the time they drink their coffee, they have already cleared much of the fog. The caffeine becomes an enhancement rather than a crutch. The third win is movement. This does not mean an hour at the gym. It means 60 seconds of deliberate physical activity, 10 jumping jacks, 20 seconds of stretching, a walk to the end of your driveway and back. The duration is almost irrelevant. The act itself is what matters. Research from the University of Georgia examined the effects of low-intensity exercise on fatigue. They found that just 10 minutes of light physical activity increased energy levels by 65% and reduced feelings of fatigue by 20%. The mechanism is straightforward. Movement increases blood flow. Increased blood flow delivers oxygen to the brain. Oxygen accelerates the clearing of sleep inertia and activates your prefrontal cortex. But there is a deeper psychological principle at work. When you move your body deliberately, you are demonstrating agency. You are proving to yourself that you are in control of your physical actions. This sense of agency is the foundation of self-efficacy, the belief that you can influence outcomes through your own behavior. Here is the second contrast. Average performers start their mornings passively. They check email, scroll social media, and consume information before they have produced anything. They hand their attention to external inputs before they have established internal control. By the time they realize what has happened, an hour has vanished and they have accomplished nothing. Elite performers start their mornings actively. They produce before they consume. They move, they create order, they hydrate. They establish agency and control before they allow the outside world to make demands. When they finally check their phone, they do so from a position of strength rather than reactivity. Now here is why the sequence matters. Each win creates chemical and psychological momentum for the next. When you get out of bed at the alarm, you defeat the limbic system's first assault. Your brain releases a small amount of dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation. When you make your bed, you complete a task and receive another dopamine release. When you drink water, you begin clearing the fog and feel physically better. When you move, you accelerate that clearing and prove your agency. Each action is small, but the compound effect is enormous. By the time 15 minutes have passed, you have accumulated 4 victories. Your brain has registered a clear pattern. You are winning. You are in control. You are the kind of person who executes. This narrative does not disappear when you leave the house. It follows you into your work, your relationships, your challenges. A study from Case Western Reserve University found that the emotional tone of the first few hours of the day strongly predicted performance and mood for the remainder of the day. The morning is not just the beginning of your day. It is the foundation upon which your entire day is built. But here is the deeper truth that most people miss. These small wins are not just about productivity. They are about identity. Every time you make your bed, you are casting a vote for the kind of person you are. Every time you hydrate first, you are proving that you prioritize self-care. Every time you move, you are demonstrating that you are someone who takes action. These votes accumulate. They shape your self-concept. And your self-concept shapes your behavior in every other domain of life. In the next chapter, we will explore this principle fully. You will understand why identity is the ultimate leverage point for transformation, and why becoming the kind of person who wins the morning is more powerful than any technique or tactic could ever be. Win the morning, win the life. Chapter 7: Identity Congruence. The most important shift you will ever make has nothing to do with your alarm clock, your environment, or your morning routine. It is a shift in a single word. And that word is the difference between people who struggle forever and people who transform permanently. The word is am. Here's what I mean. There are two ways to approach waking up early. The first way sounds like this: I am trying to become someone who wakes up early. The second way sounds like this: I am someone who wakes up early. These sentences seem almost identical. They differ by only a few words, but the psychological distance between them is enormous. One keeps you trapped in permanent struggle. The other sets you free. This is the principle of identity congruence, and it is the most powerful force in human behavior change. Let me explain how this works at the neurological level. Your brain has a deep, almost desperate need to maintain consistency between your actions and your beliefs about yourself. Psychologists call this cognitive consistency. When your behavior matches your identity, you experience psychological comfort. When your behavior contradicts your identity, you experience psychological pain. This mechanism is so powerful that your brain will go to extraordinary lengths to resolve inconsistencies. And here is the critical insight. It can resolve them in two directions. It can change the behavior to match the identity, or it can change the identity to match the behavior. When you hit snooze repeatedly, your brain faces a contradiction. You believe you want to be disciplined, but your behavior says otherwise. To resolve this tension, your brain adjusts your identity downward. It says, I guess I am not really a disciplined person. I guess I am just not a morning person. The identity shifts to match the behavior, and the behavior becomes permanent. But the reverse is equally true. When you wake at the first alarm, your brain faces the same contradiction in reverse. The action says discipline. If your identity says otherwise, something must shift. With enough repetition, your brain says, I guess I am the kind of person who wakes up when they say they will. The identity shifts to match the behavior, and the new behavior becomes permanent. This is why the small wins from the previous chapter matter so much. Each win is a vote for your new identity. Each vote accumulates. Eventually, the votes reach a tipping point, and the identity shifts become stable. Research from Stanford University's psychology department, led by Dr. Gregory Walton, has demonstrated this principle repeatedly. In one study, they found that people who were encouraged to think of voting as an expression of identity, saying, I am a voter rather than I vote, were significantly more likely to actually cast ballots. The behavior was identical. The framing was different, and the framing changed everything. Here is the first contrast between average and elite mindsets. Average performers use behavior-based language. They say, I am trying to wake up early. They say, I want to be more disciplined. They say, I am working on my morning routine. This language positions the desired state as something external, something they are pursuing but have not yet achieved. It gives them psychological permission to fail because the identity has not changed. They are still the old person attempting new behavior. Elite performers use identity-based language. They say, I am someone who rises at the first alarm. They say, I am disciplined. They say, I win my mornings. This language positions the desired state as already true. It creates cognitive pressure to behave consistently with the stated identity. Failure becomes psychologically costly because it contradicts who they have declared themselves to be. This is not delusion. This is strategic self-concept management. Let me give you a practical example of how this works. Imagine two people who both set their alarm for 5 in the morning. Person A wakes up and thinks, "I am trying to become an early riser." When the discomfort hits, their brain has an easy escape. "Well, I am not really an early riser yet. I am just trying. Missing one day does not matter." The identity provides no resistance to the behavior. Person B wakes up and thinks, "I am an early riser." When the discomfort hits, their brain faces a different calculation. Early risers get up at the first alarm. That is what they do. If I hit snooze, I am contradicting who I am. The identity creates resistance to the wrong behavior. The circumstances are identical. The alarm is the same. The discomfort is the same. But the identity framing changes the entire decision landscape. Research from the University of Pennsylvania examined this phenomenon in the context of health behaviors. They found that people who identified as healthy eaters made better food choices than people who were trying to eat healthy, even when both groups had the same nutritional knowledge and the same stated goals. Identity predicted behavior more reliably than intention. Here is the second contrast. Average performers wait for evidence before they update their identity. They think, "Once I have woken up early for 6 months, then I can call myself an early riser." They require proof before they grant themselves the label. But this creates a paradox. Without the identity, the behavior is harder to maintain. Without the behavior, the identity never forms. They are trapped in a loop that never resolves. Elite performers adopt the identity first and let the behavior follow. They understand that the label is not a reward for past performance. It is a tool for shaping future performance. They say, "I am an early riser," not because they have perfect track record, but because that declaration makes the track record more likely to emerge. This might feel uncomfortable. It might feel like lying to yourself. But consider the alternative. You have been telling yourself a story for years. "I am not a morning person. I am not disciplined. I need more sleep than other people." That story is also not based on immutable truth. It is based on past behavior that you have chosen to interpret as identity. You are already telling yourself a story. The only question is whether you will continue telling the old story or start telling a new one. Here is how to implement identity congruence practically. Tonight, before you sleep, look in the mirror and say out loud, "I am someone who wakes at the first alarm." It will feel strange. It might feel false. Say it anyway. Your brain is listening. Your subconscious is recording. Tomorrow morning, when the alarm sounds, repeat the statement internally. "I am someone who wakes at the first alarm." Then execute the 5-second countdown. Then move. When you successfully rise, acknowledge it explicitly. Say to yourself, "That is who I am. That is what I do." You are reinforcing the identity with evidence. You are casting another vote. When you fail, and at some point you will, do not use the failure to disprove your identity. Instead, treat it as an anomaly. Say, "That was not like me. That is not who I am." This framing prevents a single failure from unraveling the entire identity structure you are building. Dr. James Clear, who has studied habit formation extensively, calls this process identity-based habits. He argues that the most effective way to change behavior is not to focus on the behavior itself, but to focus on who you wish to become. The behavior follows naturally once the identity is established. You are not trying to wake up early. You are someone who wakes up early. You are not trying to be disciplined. You are disciplined. You are not trying to win your mornings. You win your mornings. That is simply what you do. This shift in language is not semantics. It is the difference between a lifetime of struggle and a permanent transformation. It is the master key that unlocks every other technique in this book. But identity without action is just fantasy. The declaration must be followed by proof. Every morning is an opportunity to vote for your identity or against it. Every morning is a chance to demonstrate, through action, who you really are. In the next chapter, you will learn how winning the morning creates momentum that extends throughout your entire day. You will understand the architecture of psychological momentum and discover why the first hour determines the other 15. Win the morning, win the life. Chapter 8: The Momentum Architecture. Your day is not a collection of disconnected hours. It is a cascade. Every moment flows from the moment before it, influenced by the momentum you have built or lost. And the direction of that cascade is determined almost entirely by what happens before 7 in the morning. This is not poetry. This is physics applied to human psychology. Isaac Newton's first law of motion states that an object in motion tends to stay in motion, and an object at rest tends to stay at rest, unless acted upon by an external force. Your morning is the force. Your day is the object. When the morning, and you set yourself in motion toward achievement. Lose the morning, and you spend the rest of the day trying to overcome inertia that should never have existed. Research from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania examined the relationship between morning mood and daily performance. They tracked hundreds of customer service employees over multiple weeks, measuring their emotional state at the start of each shift and their performance throughout the day. The findings were remarkable. Employees who started their day in a positive, energized state maintained higher performance levels for the entire shift. More importantly, negative morning states predicted negative performance even when mood improved later in the day. The morning casts a shadow that extends across every hour that follows. Here is why this happens at the neurological level. Your brain operates on prediction. It constantly forecasts what is coming based on what has already occurred. When you win your morning, your brain predicts more winning. It allocates resources accordingly. It releases neurochemicals that support focus, motivation, and resilience. It interprets ambiguous situations more optimistically. It persists longer when facing obstacles. When you lose your morning, your brain predicts more losing. It becomes conservative. It withholds resources. It interprets the same ambiguous situations as threats rather than opportunities. It gives up faster when resistance appears. You are not imagining that bad mornings lead to bad days. Your brain is literally operating differently based on the early data. A study from Ohio State University measured cortisol patterns throughout the day and correlated them with self-reported stress and performance. They discovered that cortisol levels in the first hour of waking predicted stress responses to challenges encountered 8 and 10 hours later. The morning did not just influence the morning. It programmed the body's stress response system for the entire day. Let me give you the first contrast between average and elite approaches to momentum. Average performers treat morning and afternoon as separate entities. They believe they can recover from a bad morning with a strong afternoon. They tell themselves, the day is still young, as if the early hours can be erased and rewritten. They fail to recognize that the neural and hormonal patterns established in the morning are already shaping their afternoon performance before it even begins. Elite performers understand that the morning is the rudder. They know that a ship's direction is determined by small adjustments made early, not by dramatic corrections attempted later. They protect their mornings with the same intensity that a pilot protects takeoff, because they understand that a plane is most vulnerable when it is leaving the ground, and so are they. Here is a practical framework for understanding morning momentum. Think of your willpower as a battery. Research from Case Western Reserve University, led by Dr. Roy Baumeister, demonstrated that willpower is a finite resource that depletes with use. Every decision you make, every temptation you resist, every act of self-control drains the battery slightly. When you lose your morning, you begin draining the battery immediately. You resist the urge to feel guilty. You make decisions under time pressure. You scramble to recover lost ground. By mid-morning, your willpower battery is already depleted, and the hard challenges of the day have not even arrived yet. When you win your morning, you actually charge the battery. Each small victory releases dopamine, which reinforces motivation. The sense of progress creates psychological energy rather than depleting it. You arrive at mid-morning with a full reservoir, ready to face whatever comes. This is why the same person can feel unstoppable on some days and helpless on others. The objective challenges are often identical. The difference is the momentum they carried into those challenges. Let me give you the second contrast. Average performers make their most important decisions at random times throughout the day. They schedule critical meetings in the afternoon when their cognitive resources are depleted. They tackle creative work after hours of administrative tasks have drained their focus. They save difficult conversations for the end of the day when patience is thin. Elite performers architect their days around momentum. They front-load their most important work into the morning hours when cognitive resources are highest. They batch administrative tasks into low-energy periods. They schedule difficult conversations when they have the emotional reserves to handle them well. They treat their morning momentum as a strategic asset to be deployed, not an accident to be hoped for. Here is another dimension of momentum you need to understand. Momentum is social, not just personal. The way you show up in the morning affects every person you interact with throughout the day. Research from the Harvard Business Review examined the ripple effects of leader mood on team performance. They found that leaders who arrived in positive, energized states created measurably better outcomes across their entire teams. The effect was not subtle. Team members were more creative, more collaborative, and more productive when their leader had momentum. And they were more defensive, more siloed, and more reactive when their leader did not. You may not think of yourself as a leader, but you lead someone, your family, your colleagues, your friends. The momentum you carry out of your morning influences every interaction you have with them. Win the morning, and you give them the best version of yourself. Lose the morning, and you give them the residue of your defeat. Here is the compounding effect that makes this principle so powerful. One good morning creates momentum for a good day. One good day makes the next morning slightly easier because you went to bed with a sense of accomplishment rather than regret. That easier morning creates even more momentum. Over weeks and months, this compound effect transforms your baseline. What once required enormous effort becomes your default state. A study from University College London found that habit formation follows a predictable curve. The researchers tracked participants attempting to establish new behaviors and measured how automatic those behaviors became over time. On average, it took 66 days for a behavior to become habitual, but the range was enormous, from 18 days to 254 days, depending on the complexity of the behavior and the consistency of practice. Morning momentum accelerates this process. When you win your mornings consistently, you create a positive feedback loop. Each win makes the next one easier. The habit forms faster. The identity solidifies sooner. You escape the gravitational pull of your old patterns in months rather than years. But here is the truth I need to prepare you for. You will not win every morning. The strategies in this book are powerful, but they are not magic. There will be days when the alarm sounds and something goes wrong. The power goes out. A child gets sick. An emergency demands your attention. Or you simply fail for no good reason at all. What happens on those mornings matters more than you might think. Because the way you respond to failure determines whether it becomes an isolated event or the beginning of a new losing streak. In the next chapter, you will learn the recovery protocol. You will discover how to contain failure so it does not spread. You will understand why the day after a loss is more important than the loss itself. And you will develop the psychological resilience to protect your momentum even when life does not cooperate. Win the morning, win the life. Chapter 9. When you fail, and you will. You are going to hit snooze again. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but at some point, despite everything you have learned, despite every strategy you have implemented, you are going to fail. And what you do in that moment will determine whether this book changed your life or became another forgotten good intention. Let me be direct with you. The goal is not perfection. Perfection is a fantasy that paralyzes more people than it motivates. The goal is resilience. The goal is building a system so robust that failure becomes a temporary detour rather than a permanent destination. Here is what the research tells us about habit disruption. A study from the University of Victoria examined what happens when people miss a single day of a habit they are trying to build. The findings were surprising. Missing one day had almost no measurable impact on long-term habit formation. The behavior remained on track. The neural pathways continued strengthening. One miss was statistically insignificant, but missing 2 days in a row was catastrophic. The researchers found that consecutive misses created a psychological permission structure. The first miss could be dismissed as an anomaly. The second miss established a pattern. And once a pattern was perceived, the brain began updating its identity assessment. I guess I am not really someone who does this after all. This is the critical insight you need to internalize. Your morning after a failure is more important than the failure itself. If you fail on Tuesday and win on Wednesday, the failure is contained. It remains an isolated event. But if you fail on Tuesday and fail again on Wednesday, you have started a streak. And streaks have psychological gravity that becomes harder to escape with each passing day. This is the never miss twice rule, and it is your primary defense against collapse. Here is how average and elite performers differ in their response to failure. Average performers treat failure as evidence. They hit snooze, and their brain immediately begins constructing a narrative. See, I knew I could not do this. I am just not disciplined. This always happens. They use the single failure to confirm their negative self-concept. The failure becomes proof of who they are rather than an exception to who they are becoming. Elite performers treat failure as noise. They hit snooze, and their brain registers the event without attaching meaning. That happened. It does not represent me. Tomorrow, I will execute. They refuse to let a single data point override the larger pattern they are building. They contain the failure by denying it narrative power. This is not denial. This is strategic interpretation. Let me give you a practical recovery protocol for the morning after a failure. Step 1. Acknowledge without dramatizing. Say to yourself, I missed yesterday. That happened. Do not add commentary. Do not explain why. Do not make excuses. And most importantly, do not catastrophize. The statement is factual, not emotional. Step 2. Reaffirm identity. Immediately follow the acknowledgement with an identity statement. I am someone who wakes at the first alarm. Yesterday was not like me. This framing is crucial. You are not denying the failure. You are contextualizing it as an exception rather than a rule. Step 3. Execute with zero negotiation. On the morning after a failure, you cannot afford any internal debate. The 5-second countdown must be immediate and non-negotiable. Your limbic system will use yesterday's failure as ammunition. You already broke the streak. One more day will not matter. You must move before that argument fully forms. Step 4. Stack the wins aggressively. After a failure, the small wins cascade becomes even more important. Make the bed immediately. Drink the water deliberately. Move your body intentionally. You are rebuilding momentum from zero, and every small victory matters more than usual. Research from Stanford University's Behavior Design Lab, led by Dr. B.J. Fogg, examined how people successfully recover from habit disruptions. They found that the key variable was not motivation, not willpower, and not even the specific recovery strategy. The key variable was speed. People who recovered quickly, ideally within 24 hours, maintained their long-term trajectory. People who allowed the gap to extend lost significant ground. The morning after a failure is not a time for reflection. It is a time for action. Analyze later. Execute now. Here is the second contrast between average and elite recovery. Average performers wait until they feel ready to restart. They tell themselves, I will get back on track when I feel motivated. They treat the return to discipline as something that requires favorable conditions. But favorable conditions rarely arrive on their own. The waiting extends. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. The habit dies not from a single failure, but from the failure to recover. Elite performers restart before they feel ready. They understand that motivation follows action, not the other way around. They do not wait to feel disciplined. They act disciplined, and the feeling follows. The morning after a failure, they execute the protocol regardless of emotional state. They know that the act of recovery is itself a victory that rebuilds momentum. Let me give you another principle from the research. Dr. Kristen Neff at the University of Texas has spent decades studying self-compassion. Her findings challenge the conventional wisdom that we need to be hard on ourselves after failure. She discovered that self-criticism after setbacks actually increased the likelihood of future failures. It created shame, and shame triggered avoidance. People who beat themselves up for missing a workout were less likely to exercise the next day, not more. Self-compassion, by contrast, increased resilience. People who treated themselves with kindness after failure Acknowledging the setback without harsh judgment, recovered faster and maintained habits longer. This does not mean lowering your standards. It means separating your worth as a person from your performance on a single day. You can hold high standards and still be kind to yourself when you fall short. In fact, kindness makes it easier to return to those high standards because it removes the shame barrier. Here is how to apply self-compassion practically. When you fail, speak to yourself as you would speak to a friend who failed. You would not tell a friend, "You are pathetic. You will never change. Why do you even try?" You would say, "That is okay. Everyone stumbles. Tomorrow is a new opportunity." Offer yourself the same grace. Now let me address a fear you might have. You might worry that being kind to yourself after failure will make failure more acceptable. You might think you need the harsh self-talk to stay motivated. The research says otherwise. Self-compassion does not increase failure rates. It increases recovery rates. And recovery is what determines long-term success. There is one more principle you need to understand about failure. Not all failures are equal. There is a difference between failing because you made a choice and failing because life intervened. If you hit snooze because you simply did not want to get up, that is a discipline failure. Apply the recovery protocol and move forward. But if you hit snooze because your child was sick at 3 in the morning and you genuinely needed the rest, that is not a discipline failure. That is wisdom. That is recognizing that rules exist to serve you, not to enslave you. Elite performers know when to hold the line and when to make intelligent exceptions. The test is simple. Ask yourself, am I making an excuse or am I making a decision? Excuses are backward-looking justifications. Decisions are forward-looking choices. Learn to tell the difference. You are going to fail. That is not pessimism. That is reality. But failure does not have to define you. It does not have to derail you. With the right response, failure becomes nothing more than a brief interruption in a long story of transformation. In the final chapter, you will make a promise. Not to me, not to anyone else, to yourself. And that promise, kept consistently over time, will change everything. Win the morning, win the life. Chapter 10, The Promise. Tomorrow morning, your alarm will sound. And in that moment, everything you have learned will be tested. Not by me, not by the world, by you. The question is not whether you understand what to do. The question is whether you will do it. 1 year from now, you will be a different person. That is inevitable. Time changes everyone. The only variable is the direction of that change. You will either be someone who kept the promise or someone who broke it. Both futures are equally possible right now. The only thing that separates them is what you do tomorrow morning. Here is what I want you to understand. This book was never about waking up early. Waking up early is just the vehicle. The destination is self-trust. Self-trust is earned through kept promises, especially the promises you make to yourself when no one else is watching. The alarm clock is your daily opportunity to earn that trust or destroy it. Here is the contrast I want to leave you with. Average people make promises casually. They find exceptions. They postpone. And each broken promise erodes their self-trust until eventually they stop believing anything they tell themselves. Elite performers treat promises to themselves as sacred. They make fewer promises, but they keep the ones they make. That selective integrity builds a foundation that makes them capable of extraordinary things. The promise I am asking you to make is simple and immediate. Tomorrow morning, when your alarm sounds, you will count backwards from 5 and you will move. 1 morning, 1 countdown, 1 action. If you keep that promise, you will make it again the next night. Day by day, promise by promise, you will build a chain of integrity that becomes unbreakable. You do not need to commit to a lifetime of early rising. You need to commit to tomorrow. Tomorrow is manageable. Tomorrow is achievable. Tomorrow is the only unit of time where your actions actually matter. I cannot guarantee that this time will be different. I cannot reach through these words and force you out of bed. The choice is entirely yours. But you are not the same person who failed before. You now understand the neurological battle. You have the 5-second protocol. You have the environmental design strategies. You have the small wins cascade. You understand identity congruence and momentum architecture. You are armed with knowledge that most people will never have. The question is whether you will use it. Set your alarm tonight with intention. Place your phone across the room. Prepare everything you need. And when that alarm sounds in the dark early hours, remember this moment. Remember who you are becoming. Count backwards from 5 and move. The first war of your day is waiting. The two versions of you will wake up together. One will remember your goals. One will whisper for 9 more minutes. You already know which one to listen to. Win the morning, win the life. Your morning starts now.